Anthony, for example, by modern standards, should be the villain of the piece. He feels like he has ownership of his sister's body. He feels like an appropriate response to her being consensually kissed in a park is to shoot the guy in the face. Alright, let's talk about Bridgerton Season 1. I had not seen Bridgerton Season 1 when it first came out. I didn't see Season 2. I didn't see Queen Charlotte, but I saw that Season 3 was coming out, and I needed something to talk about on this channel. Now, I completely missed Bridgerton as it was originally airing because everyone in my life told me I would hate it. I have no clue what they were on about. Now, yes, this show isn't perfect, but watching this in 2024 without all the negative discourse around it, just engaging with it, I had such a good time with this show. So I want this video to sort of serve as a refresher, kind of a looking back on Bridgerton Season 1, as well as some of the discourse I do and don't agree with. I kind of just want this to be a deep dive into Season 1. However, I am assuming you've seen the show. This is going to be full spoilers. I'll do my best to have it make sense for people that haven't seen the first season, but really you should only be watching this video if you've seen that first season. Basically, the story here, very, very quickly for those who haven't seen the show, is it's a love story between Daphne and Simon. Daphne is picked by the Queen as the most exciting wife option for the men that are looking for a wife. She doesn't like any of the options that are presented to her. Through some contrived moments, she bumps into Simon. Now, Simon does not want to be a husband. He does not want to have kids because he hates his father. He made a deathbed promise to his father that he does not want to carry on the bloodline. However, they kind of bump into each other, and through these circumstances, they agree to enter into a fake relationship. The reasoning for this is so Simon doesn't need to engage in an actual marriage, an actual relationship. Everyone that keeps coming up to him and telling him that he needs to be in a relationship, he can tell to basically piss off because he's got Daphne. And the reasoning that Simon offers Daphne for this fake relationship is, hey, by dating me, your options in men are going to go way up because everyone's going to look at you and go, oh, if she's dating a duke, that's a big status boost for me if I can court her away from him. On top of that, so far, Daphne being picked as the diamond, as the most exciting option by the Queen, has resulted in a bunch of unfavorable men trying to seduce her, court her, and not leave her alone. So it adds a sense of safety and security and kind of ease of life for both of them to enter into this fake relationship. Anyone with a brain can see that this fake relationship is going to turn into a real relationship. This is a very tropey show. This is the most tropey show to ever trope, and that's fine. That's what it's looking to do. That's part of the buy-in for this show. Basically, what escalates this is Simon gets carried away in a maze. He tries to seduce Daphne, and they get caught by Daphne's brother. Daphne's brother is incredibly traditional, and he goes, oh my god, you've tarnished my sister. No one's gonna want her now because you've put your dirty hands all over her. By the way, just funny side note, the brother and the Duke Simon are actually best buddies of a long time. So this is additionally funny and irrational. Basically, the brother presents Simon two options when it comes to Daphne. He says either you marry her right now or we're gonna have a duel where I shoot you in the face. And Simon is so dedicated to, I'm not gonna have kids, I'm not gonna carry on my bloodline, fuck my dad. He literally goes, yeah, all right, I'm gonna get shot in the face, let's duel. Daphne then interrupts this duel and goes, actually, we're getting married. So now they're in a forced marriage that Simon doesn't really want to be in because he doesn't want to continue his bloodline. However, he is sexually attracted to Daphne. He does long for Daphne, but he can't act on it. So long story short, they do get married. It is a forced relationship because they haven't properly fallen in love. Finally, on the way to Simon's estate, and when they get to Simon's estate, they start having sex, they start falling in love, and minus a few incredibly notable speed bumps, they fall in love and live together happily ever after. It's a very typical fake romance to actual romance story full of these conventions and tropes. However, the people that complain about how predictable this is, the fact that it reminds them of a Regency era to all the boys I loved before, I feel like I'm missing the forest for the trees. To me, it feels like watching superhero movies and complaining that in each superhero movie, bad guy punches good guy and good guy punches bad guy until good guy prevails. This sort of content, these sort of shows are trying to actively engage in these tropes and provide a sense of familiarity, and kind of the excitement and the tension is when it plays with these traditional tropes and adds new flavors into it. For example, with Bridgerton, one of the main kind of selling points and points of difference is the colorblind casting and kind of the interesting angles and flavor that adds to the show. Another thing that makes this show interesting is a lot of its characters engage engage in really dated, archaic, traditional sexist values. However, when they go to balls and parties, there's string arrangements of modern music from the 2010s and 2020s. It's a fascinating contrast. I've seen people complain that it's goofy, but I think it actually reminds you that you're watching a show in modern day about values and traditions that we no longer support and actively discourage. I don't want to seem like I'm glazing it or overanalyzing too hard. I feel like the choice to have these modern things thrown into this show set in the Regency era leaves us as an audience going, how do we apply our modern values to what we are seeing on screen? Now that quick sort of introduction review is done, let's actually talk about my pros and my cons. Now, in terms of my pros, I have so much respect for this show in terms of its structure. I was actually so pleasantly surprised with how mature the structure was. I know this show is seen as trashy and immature, but I actually have to say the balls it took to hold off on basically all the big sexual steamy centerpieces that were a selling point of this show until the last 2 or 3 episodes was like a really inspired choice. On top of that, they also held off on the Duke's estate and all this lavish, insane, beautiful scenery. Now, yes, the show starts off from the jump with gorgeous costumes and gorgeous buildings, but when you get to the Duke's estate, it genuinely feels like another world, and I think that is strengthened by the fact that they held off for like 4 or 5 episodes to get there. Genuinely, by the way the show was set up, I never thought we were going to leave the kind of like center point London that the Bridgerton and the Featherington family live in, but I feel like by the time Daphne actually leaves central London to go to Duke Simon's estate, it actually feels like as an audience you are like leaving the main comfort of the show that you've been built up to. You feel like you're leaving this world with her. It adds a sense of discomfort and unfamiliarity, and you can kind of chop this season in half with those 2 chunks. It genuinely feels like a first and a second act. It feels like a part 1 and a part 2. And I've noticed that Netflix is actually splitting season 3 of Bridgerton in 2. And I feel like if any season was going to benefit from splitting it in 2, it would have been this one. There is such a clear difference in tone and tension and stakes. It really feels like Daphne is going from like a young, naive girl to being thrown into this really adult world of high stakes marriage and sex and complicated issues that she is actively not ready for. And we see the result of that in the most controversial scene of this show, which we will get to. Next, I actually thought the acting and the performances from pretty much most of the main cast not only was like good, but actually kind of great. The woman that plays Daphne, I believe it's Phoebe Dynevor, absolutely fantastic. She was fantastic in Fair Play, by the way. If you have not seen that movie, please check it out. But she is great in this show. She knows how to be likable and scared and naive and kind of like mousy, and then when she needs to be, she can be really combative, really well spoken, and have this massive stage presence. She's genuinely fantastic in this show, and I know so many people have problems with her character, but you do need to separate that from the actress. She's conveying these problematic emotions and moments so incredibly well. Honestly, a lot of the first season kind of relies on how good her central performance is. It is that good in my opinion. On top of that, the sets are fantastic. Every single episode, especially set in the Queen's mansion or the Duke's estate, you are sitting there going, oh my god, I can't believe how much effort Netflix put into the set design, into the music, into the sets. It's absolutely phenomenal, like genuinely a sight to behold. And so many Netflix originals lately have started dropping the ball. I did notice a substantial quality drop off in The Crown in the later seasons. The sets got less compelling, it was less well shot, less good noticeable actors, similar to Sex Education. You watch season 4 compared to season 1 and it's such a less focused show. But when I was watching this first season of Bridgerton, I was reminded of how good streaming shows can be, how good Netflix originals can be when they really want to commit to the bit. The only person in the actual main cast I think was a bit here or there is Simon. I don't know if it was like a writing thing, but his initial introduction did feel a bit miscalculated. He felt like he belonged in Doctor Who or something, like that just something was not right. He felt a bit modern in the way he carried himself and the way he spoke compared to a lot of the other characters. However, by the time we got to his estate, I was completely sold on him. So this might just be warming up to the character in general, but I do remember thinking he has the face of someone who's seen an iPhone. That sort of vibe, you know? It literally felt like he'd put his iPhone down and then started acting. I can't really explain it better than that. If you know that sort of phenomenon, you know exactly what I'm talking about. However, as the season went on, he became such an interesting character and his performance really improved. Honestly, I think he just needed to be isolated with Daphne's character to really have a lot to chew on. As I said, music and set sets were fantastic. Another pro is Whistledown. Now, Whistledown is also going to show up in my cons, but I think as a framing device, Whistledown had a lot of potential. Unfortunately, I think the potential isn't fully acted on. However, I do appreciate what it adds to the structure. I also appreciate her narration. A lot of the time she'll be talking about other situations, but they will eerily apply to current situations we are watching, particularly notably one of them being the big controversial Daphne and Simon moment. Another thing I really liked, for some reason, this show's fight scenes are like unbelievable. I don't know what was in the water. I don't know why it felt like they got Matthew Vaughn of like Kingsman to direct random fight scenes in this show, especially a show that is trying to be romantic and mostly just beautiful and dainty and appeal to like a female audience. Out of nowhere, they'll have these incredibly brutal, archaic, like really well done, well shot fight scenes, particularly the one where Anthony and Simon start beefing. It actually feels like it belongs in a Kingsman movie. It's insane. It was a pleasure to watch, and as an action movie fan, I was glad it was there. Me and my girlfriend were literally sitting there going, oh my god, like where did these come from? Like they're that good. Next, I do actually want to talk about the steamy scenes. I think they are incredibly well done and incredibly tasteful. Again, we will get to the big controversial scene of this show because I really want to talk about. But aside from that one, I think they're really classy. I think they're really tasteful. And I think in terms of like steamy erotic scenes, you can't really get much better than that. I think they're tasteful. On top of that, I think they're very female gazy. There has been this constant conversation in Twitter about how a lot of like girl porn in the MCU is typically framed from the male gaze of like admiration. And Bridgerton feels like it's actively trying to undo that.
All of the shirtless muscle shots in the MCU, that's a male power fantasy, not a female sexual fantasy. Because, yeah, tons of women are attracted to him, but this is not for us.
And Bridgerton feels like it's actively trying to undo that and answer for that. And I think it does an exceptionally good job. Reading into the discourse, it seems like I'm not alone in this feeling. It seems like this was kind of the highlight and the selling point of this show. So much so that Netflix actually released a special where part of the appeal of the interviews was talking and ranking the sex scenes. I also saw there was an article that was literally just devoted to ranking shots of Simon's butt. But next, unfortunately, we do need to get into cons. Some of the acting performances were shocking. Mainly the biggest one that sticks out is the acting from the opera singer that was with Anthony. Where did they find her? This genuinely felt like it belonged in Degrassi or like a low budget Disney show. I don't know what happened with this performance. I don't know if it was just bad dialogue, but genuinely every time she was on screen, I was like, go girl, give us absolutely nothing. This was hard to watch. On top of that, she's acting across from Anthony, whose actor is absolutely incredible. He was fantastic in Fellow Travelers, and he crushes pretty much every scene he's in. So the contrast between these two was really hard to watch. Next, I just have to vent. The opening credits for Bridgerton need to be abolished. They are so bad. Whose idea were these awful cartoony opening credits with this like stock Microsoft Word font for the word Bridgerton? Absolutely disgusting, an absolute eyesore. It is so overly bright, overly saturated. The CGI looks like garbage. It genuinely feels like a really bad version of like the Game of Thrones intro. It feels like they just sat there and they went, what are we going to do for an intro? I don't know, do whatever Game of Thrones did, just make it bright and cute. It's so bad. On top of that, they need an alternate version for when the show opens with a dark or emotional scene. The show will open with someone dying from complications of birth or someone dying from like a bee sting in this like horrific harrowing scene, and then it'll hard cut to the most like schmaltzy, over the top, oversaturated like intro. It just does not work tonally. It feels like it belongs in a show that's made for kids and not an adult show like Bridgerton, in my opinion. And I think Netflix actually realized this because if you watch Queen Charlotte, the opening intro for that is subtle and restrained and like visually gorgeous to look at, like genuinely striking. So I don't know what they were doing with Bridgerton. I have no clue. Next, we got the Whistledown reveal. What on earth? I'm sorry, they really needed to hold off on the reveal of Whistledown to rank up the tension, because so far I think Whistledown in season 1 did not get enough done for this to be a substantial reveal. I don't think she caused enough chaos. I know she did reveal the pregnancy that was getting hidden, but aside from that, she really didn't impact the major players too much to a point where this reveal really felt like high stakes. I don't know why they didn't hold off for this for another season or two, because if it was revealed at the end of season 2 as a twist, after what Eloise was put through, it would hit way harder. On top of that, we did not know anything about Penelope really at that point for that to be an interesting reveal. Like, they really framed it like everyone at home was going to be like, oh, it's Penelope. Oh my God. Oh, who would have thought? Oh, not Penelope. That's so out of character. I never would have guessed. She had no character at that point. We really did not know about her. And on top of that, if the whole angle is going to be like, oh, she's so quiet in group settings, but secretly she goes home and scribbles. That's kind of the most obvious subversion you could choose. That's a very typical kind of like, oh, she's quiet in public, but has this secret outlet. Again, if you've seen like Wicked Little Letters, for example, my last major con for this first season is the Marina pregnancy subplot. Just feels like a waste of time. I really loved when it was introduced. I loved the tension that was built. I loved the lies that were fed to her. And I actually really like the tragedy of her having to keep this pregnancy hidden and then again in the way of her love interest later on in the season. I actually really liked most of it. The issue is she is ushered out of the show with basically no fanfare, and what they do with her in season 2 feels so rushed, so lazy and so forced that retroactively it makes what we saw in season 1 kind of worse. That feels like a waste of time and a detour for the massive disrespect they give her in season 2. Unless we get more from her down the line, which it feels like at this point we're not, given how little we got in season 2. I think it just is a really underwhelming plot line. I think given how poorly she was handled in season 2, her amount of screen time in season 1 ultimately amounting to nothing is really disappointing and sticks out as a bit of a con for this show. However, I do just want to specify that these are weighted completely differently. Overall, I have really positive feelings for this first season, and these are just minor gripes that I would have changed personally. Next, I just want to push back on some of the discourse. Basically, after watching this first season, I watched all the notable big video essays and big YouTubers talk about the show and the books and the controversies, and some of them were fantastic, and some of them I hated and absolutely disagreed with and think they were just going into this show wanting to hate it. I just want to push back on some of the general discourse I did not like. First off, I saw 1 or 2 video essays explicitly complain that Simon and Daphne do not have chemistry. Honestly, this is going to sound really mean. This almost borderline feels like jealousy or projection or something, because I don't get what these people are talking about. I only heard these complaints from men. I did not hear these complaints from women, and I have to disagree. I think they had tons of chemistry, and yes, a lot of it was physical chemistry, which is something that season 2 kind of subverts with Kate and Anthony, but it was chemistry nonetheless. It was there. I don't know what people are talking about. I saw people complaining like, oh, it isn't erotic to tell a girl that she should go home and touch herself. I can't believe she would actually fall for him after that.
There's also that absolutely awful sequence where Simon quite literally explains to Daphne what masturbation is. It's presented in a weird way. It's very clear that the scene is meant to be hot and full of sensual tension, but it's just really awkward.
You do touch yourself.
And it's like, I disagree. Like, as an audience member, for me, I totally got it. I totally got it. Again, to me, it feels like this clash of the female gaze and the male gaze kind of like butting heads. It feels like these male reviewers just can't really click into why this show works for so many people, and I just don't get it. Like, they have tons of chemistry, and I will die on that hill. Next, I saw a lot of people complain about the sexist and dated attitudes that were presented in this show, and unfortunately, I do just feel like that's part of the buy-in for this series. Anthony, for example, by modern standards, should be the villain of the piece. He feels like he has ownership of his sister's body. He feels like an appropriate response to her being consensually kissed in a park is to shoot the guy in the face. But we understand as audience members that these were kind of customs of the time, and as a result, that's why season 2, him being a main character, isn't that big of a deal. But it feels like a lot of the reviews I watched for season 1 are just people sitting there going, this is bad, this is wrong, I can't believe the show would be saying this, and this. And I'm like, yeah, unfortunately, there are things that we don't approve of by modern day standards that were around back then, and I think the show is just trying to show that. You know, it feels like a similar thing to if people were to watch Succession and explain about the lack of representation of impoverished people. It's like the show is fundamentally not about that, not interested in that, and that goes against the point that the show is trying to make.
How much is a gallon of milk?
I
don't know. I mean, who the fuck knows, Dad? Literally, no one knows. Who gives a shit?
One video I specifically want to call out is the biggest video essay on YouTube about Bridgerton season 1. I feel like was an absolute joke. I know it looks good because it's well presented and it uses really well-timed clips for over 45 minutes, but this video essay from like Friendly Space Ninja just felt like bad faith arguments for 43 minutes about how immoral the show is and how terrible its characters are. And personally, I feel like if the way you're going to approach this show is this is dated, this is wrong, this person is unforgivable, and therefore the show is bad, I feel like you're missing on a lot of great discourse and conversations that you could be getting out of this show. And this is no better explored or exemplified for me than the big Simon and Daphne conflict that comes up in the back end of the show. So basically, as I mentioned before, Simon fundamentally does not want to have kids. He is forced into a marriage by Daphne. Now, yes, that is to save his life, but she just randomly goes, "We're getting married." And then he has to go along with it. He explicitly tells her at multiple points, "I can't have kids." Now, this is important. This is a miscommunication. It is of my opinion that Simon is not actually lying to Daphne, but there is a miscommunication going on. He is saying, "I can't have kids," in a way that a guy, when he gets his girlfriend accidentally pregnant, goes, "Oh my God, I can't have kids right now. I cannot have a child." Obviously, they are physically capable of having a child. They don't want to.
I can never give you children. It is your dream to be a mother. You deserve nothing less. You deserve everything your heart desires. I cannot provide it for you. Nor could I ever ask such a sacrifice. Please, Daphne, for your own sake, you must stand aside and let your brother finish this.
There will be no need to resume. The Duke and I are to be married.
This miscommunication explodes because Daphne is not sex educated at all. And when they have sex, he pulls out every time in front of her instead of sowing his seed. Now, basically every single sex scene ends with him pulling out and like finishing elsewhere. Eventually she asks someone how babies are flat out made and realizes that what Simon is doing is stopping him from being able to have kids. So there is a miscommunication there. And then basically this leads to a scene where she assaults him. They are having consensual sex. She is knowingly going into it, trying to get him to do something that he does not want to do, which is finish inside her. She holds him down and forces him to stay in against his will. He explicitly says, "Stop, what are you doing?" It is a really well done example of withdrawn consent that Daphne does not respect. They then have a massive fight where she says that he lied to her because he said that he can't have kids. And she said there is a massive difference between can't have kids and won't have kids. You lied to me, you took advantage of me. Yada, 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 yada.
Told you I cannot give you children.
Cannot and will not are two entirely different things. You chose this for yourself. You chose to lie to me.
I did not lie. I thought you were prepared. I thought you understood how a child came to be.
Now, basically, the arc ends here with Simon basically saying, if you have that kid, I'm going to stay here, but we are not going to be in love after what you've done to me. I will raise the kid because it's the right thing to do, but you and I will not be a happy married couple. And he said, if you get your period, if you don't have a kid, we are done. We are divorced. You are done. All right. So the big tension for the remainder of the season is will or won't she have a child or have her period? She is in hysterics because she eventually has her period. Somehow Simon and Daphne eventually make up, and not only do they make up, but eventually they consensually have a child, live happily ever after. Now, people were mad at this scene and mad at this show because basically they feel like Daphne got away scot-free. And I just want to get into that because first off, I don't think she exactly got off scot-free, but I also think what's happening here is we are playing modern morals to a show that does not play by those rules. The story itself, the characters itself, do not play by those rules. And that's really important to remember. This is the same world where women are basically auctioned off and picked as the best, most exciting option for men. Their virginity is meant to remain intact. They can't even be touched or kissed, even against their will, or they are seen as tarnished and less than. And this is widely accepted by main characters that are heroes of the story. Anthony, again, sees his sister as tarnished after Simon makes a move on her. On top of that, the whole premise of the show is like deeply sexist. Each season we're following the diamond, which is basically young girls and women being used as leverage to improve social status for families. This is not a show or a story that plays by modern morals. This is also set in a time where marriage implies complete ownership and control over each other's bodies. And I'm not saying I agree with that, but what I am saying is this is custom for the time. If we had a historically accurate version of Bridgerton, it would probably be assault in every single episode. It would be absolutely awful and mean and cruel. It'd be bordering on unwatchable. And the reason I bring all this up is because a massive criticism of the show is that Daphne was not held accountable. She was not punished. And I don't really know what people expect the punishment to be. She was never going to get arrested or sent to jail for what she did to Simon. And I know by modern standards, what she did was awful. And even back then, what she did was awful. Even if it wasn't illegal or a crime back then, just based on the fact that she knew he explicitly did not want to have kids and went against that and tried to take it from him, is an absolutely awful thing to do. But this show is set in a time where the only real recourse for that, or the only way this can be handled, is on emotional level. There was not going to be sort of any Law and Order moment for this. The only real punishment she can get is Simon threatening to leave, or leaving, or mistreating her himself. The only real way you can hurt Daphne or have her held accountable is her relationship with Simon falls apart. And it actually does fall apart for a while. Everyone got annoyed because she tried to put it on Simon. Yeah, you should be annoyed. She's an annoying character at that point. She's the bad guy in that situation. She's gaslighting him. She's manipulating him. She's not taking accountability. And personally, I don't think the show is saying that's okay. Simon is clearly framed as the victim in that situation. And I think the show's hoping that audience members at home are smart enough to pick up on that. I felt bad for Simon. When I was sitting there and his stutter started to come back while he was actually trying to tell Daphne off and tell her, do you realize what you've done? It was really hard to watch. On top of that, I believe him when he says to her in that really emotional moment, like, I thought you knew. I thought you knew what was happening every time I finished. I thought you understood. Yes, we don't get a bunch of scenes where Simon's sitting there with his friends talking about his harrowing, traumatic experience, because I think back then, that's not how it would have been handled. It just would have been a weird marital spat behind closed doors that would have had to been handled between the two parties. Unless you want to take Anthony's approach and Simon just chooses to shoot Daphne in the face. So yes, by modern standards, the ideal punishment would have been she went to jail, or he threatened legal action, or her name was forever tarnished, or she lost her job. She basically got Me Too'd, but that isn't going to apply in Bridgerton. Really, the only thing she had to lose was Simon and the baby, and she didn't conceive from that initial assault, and Simon did threaten to leave, and they barely made it at the end. So I agree with people, yes, in an ideal world, more would have happened to Daphne for that, but it's not an ideal world. It's Bridgerton. They are nasty and sexist and racist and dated. That is a core part of the show that is being explored. On top of that, I actually think in terms of withdrawn consent portrayals, it wasn't an easy watch. It was like an awful, hard to watch scene. But in terms of visualizing that, I think it starts a good conversation. I think if you wanted to explain to dumb frat bro men what withdrawn consent looks like, you can show them that scene. That is clearly a consensual sex scene at one point that transitions to a flat out assault when Simon asks her to stop. What are you doing? Get off me. And she doesn't. I think if people didn't come down so hard on the show for Daphne getting away with it, I think we would have had a really good conversation about good, accurate portrayals of withdrawn consent. I mean, look, that's just my opinion, but so many video essays were just so angry at the show for the fact that it seems to think Daphne's assault on Simon was okay. And I am sitting here in 2024 watching the show going, absolutely not. The show did not think that was okay. The show knows that's bad, and it's used as a big source of conflict and almost explodes the relationship. It's dated and unfair, but it's a dated and unfair and cruel world. However, what I will say an interesting discussion to have, and what I want to ask my audience is, for those of you who still bought into Simon and Daphne's relationship at the end, those of you who are still happy for Simon and Daphne, could you be happy for Simon and Daphne if it was gender swapped in that moment of withdrawn consent portrayal? You know, if it was gender swapped, if there was a situation where Simon basically wanted to finish, wanted to conceive, and Daphne said, no, I'm not ready, please stop, and he kept going, could we still have a moment after some conflict where we buy into their relationship at the end? Or is this a double standard? I'm genuinely asking. I'm not mad as a guy. I don't hate the show. I actually bought into their love story at the end and was still rooting for them. And I have to ask myself the same question. If it was gender swapped, would I be on board? And my answer is no. Could you handle it if it was the other way around? And if you can't, what do you think the difference there is? But overall, I just think This whole centerpiece, this whole massive conflict was such an interesting part of the show, the most mature and fascinating and dark and twisted part of the show. And I feel like it actually elevated the overall season for me. So going through all the discourse and seeing people were so mad and so upset about it and didn't want to engage in the actual conflict at all was really disappointing and really underwhelming. It just felt people were really desperate to go, that's not okay, everyone. I just want to tell you that's not okay. And to me, it felt like the show was never saying that was okay. It just felt like a really fly on the wall portrayal of like inside the house abuse. On top of that, it also feels like a sort of haunting moment of like, what a shame back then there was no recourse for these sort of things. So it felt like a really good kind of like warning and reminder about the dangers of like keeping people in the dark of like important conversations around sex education and consent. Like, look what happens when you don't talk to your kids or your family members about these issues, how much it can escalate and how much miscommunication can happen. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. I know that was probably a bit heavier than what you wanted from a Bridgerton video, but I will be doing a season 2 video as well as a Queen Charlotte video. Thank you so much for watching. Have a lovely day.